Hello and welcome to Maximum Beyonce, the first talking book about the artist. It was written and researched by Keith Rodway, music is by Amanda Thompson, and it is read by Nancy McLean. You can check out our full catalogue on our website at www.chromedreams.co.uk.
I feel like it's just the birth of a woman, the growth of a woman. And I know that I've truly evolved into a true artist, and I want people to get that from the album.
In November 2003, having just turned 22, Beyonce Knowles was already one of the most glamorous and successful performers in the highly competitive and influential world of urban music. In just 6 years, she'd gone from an ambitious wannabe to become one of the most distinctive voices in R&B, and possibly the whole of pop. Born in Houston into a loving, religious and hard-working family, Beyoncé was encouraged from an early age to make the most of her talents as a singer and dancer. Through thorough and rigorous training at stage school, and having gained hard-won experience in local talent contests and beauty pageants, Beyoncé was already sure at the age of 16 of who she was, what she wanted, and how to get it. With her father Matthew as her tireless manager, overseeing every facet of her career, and her mother Tina working as a stylist and costume designer, the Beyoncé Knowles phenomenon was very much a family affair. Her supportive family environment and steadfast religious beliefs keep temptations in check, where more dysfunctional personalities might have succumbed to the devil's triangle of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. All 4 original members of Destiny's Child, the group that would propel Beyoncé to stratospheric success, were barely 16 when the music industry began its frenzy of excitement over these 4 sweet southern songbirds. Their faultless stage show and soaring harmonies were complemented by a strong female empowerment ethic that made the Spice Girls seem like human candy floss. These young women were feisty, opinionated, and powerful, and they had songs whose imaginative power matched their formidable attitude. And at the centre of all this was Beyoncé, the urban warrior queen sent to conquer the world of pop. This is her story.
I wanted people to see a more vulnerable side and a more human side, and I wanted them to get a good feel of the type of music that I really love. So the producers that could bring that out in me, that's what I wanted to work with.
For the first half of the 20th century, life for black people in America was often bound up with hardship and almost unbearable sorrow. Many of the older generations had begun their lives as slaves or as second-class citizens with few rights or privileges. Respect for black people in a white-dominated world was hard-won. But in the 1960s, the pace quickened in the struggle for equal rights for Afro-Americans. Thanks to the sacrifices made by Dr. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, as well as many of the unsung heroes of the civil rights struggles, black people were finally able to break free of the appalling restrictions that had been imposed on them by mainstream society. It meant that for people like Matthew and Tina Knowles of Houston, Texas, life could offer greater opportunities than those they had ever dreamed of. And for their daughter Beyoncé, it would mean the chance to rise to the top of her chosen profession as a performer in the world of 21st century R&B, and to radically change the world of pop music. Beyoncé was born in Houston on September 4th, 1981. She came into a world just beginning to enter the digital age, a time when the entertainment industry was busy reinventing itself. CDs would soon replace vinyl LPs, and a bewildering number of other digital media would follow. MTV, with its heavy emphasis on videos, would soon become a powerful promotional arena for future performing sensations like Beyoncé. As a child, she was lucky not to have to endure the grinding poverty that so many black people have had to suffer and still do. Her parents were successful and prosperous, and Beyoncé was brought up in a loving, secure environment in a leafy suburb of Houston. Her father, Matthew, worked as a salesman for a pharmaceutical company. Her mother, Tina, had her own hairdressing business, appropriately named Headliners, in downtown Houston. Her salon was just around the corner from the family church, the St. John's United Methodist. Religion has always been a vital part of Beyoncé's life. She and the other members of the group they would form, Destiny's Child, have often publicly credited God with their extraordinary success. Beyoncé was groomed for success by her parents from an early age. Matthew and Tina had ambitious plans for their talented young daughter. By the age of 10, she'd become a seasoned veteran of beauty pageants and talent contests. Her next step was to audition for a place in a female vocal group, being formed by a female entrepreneur named Andretta Tillman, who would become in later years Destiny's Child's close friend and mentor. The group she formed was called Girls' Time. It was here that Beyoncé met Latavia Robertson, who would become the youngest member of Destiny's Child, and her cousin, Calendria Rowland, known as Kelly. Both girls were born, like Beyoncé, in 1981. Beyoncé and Kelly formed a close relationship that still exists today. Kelly's mother worked full-time and found it hard to devote enough time to her young daughter. When Kelly was 9 years old, she was spending so much time with the Knowles family that her mother asked Matthew to become her full-time guardian. Beyoncé and Kelly became like sisters. Andretta Tillman auditioned 30 girls between the age of 8 and 10 for her new project. From the original 6 chosen, Beyoncé, Kelly and Latavia would go on to change pop history. A year after the group's formation, the 6 young wannabes were featured on a national TV talent show called Star Search. Though their hopes were high, they failed to win in their chosen category, and 3 of the girls left. When LaToya Luckett joined shortly afterwards, the 3 remaining members became 4. All they needed now was a name. When Beyoncé's mum, Tina, opened the Bible one day at the book of Isaiah, a photograph of Beyoncé fell out, and among the text beneath was the word Destiny. Tina added the word Child. The group now had a name, and Beyoncé could begin her fabulous rise to stardom. High on their list of requirements to become true showbiz professionals was a manager. Matthew Knowles quit his day job at the pharmaceutical company and formed his own management group. With the 4 girls using Tina's salon for evening rehearsals, it naturally followed that she would become their stylist. This meant looking after their hair, their makeup, and designing the stunning, sexy stage outfits that would later become a vital and integral part of their image. Part tribal teen queens and part untouchable fantasy objects of young male desire. With such a tight-knit family group to guide, advise and train them for their rocket ride to the top, they could hardly fail. And with the congregation of the St. John's United Methodist Church, including the group in their prayer list every Sunday, they may truly have had God on their side.
I don't like yes people. I don't like people that just tell me what they think I want to hear. I want to know the truth. Everyone from my makeup to my hair people to my assistants to the producers I work with to my dancers and to the choreographers, I want them all to be good people.
Matthew Knowles must have known instinctively what it took to get to the top in show business. The idea was simple. You worked hard, you never thought of anything else, and when it seemed you couldn't work any harder, you found the strength to do so. A typical day in the life of the recently formed Destiny's Child would often involve 2 hours fitness workouts and 6 hours rehearsal time. The group's idols from black music of the past were classic acts such as Diana Ross and the Supremes, and Michael Jackson. the girls would gather round the Knowles family television, studying video footage of the Supremes or the Jacksons, learning each move in detail. By the time the girls were 15 years old, they had absorbed enough inspiration and had worked so hard at all aspects of performing on stage that they were ready to take on the music business as fully fledged professionals. Though they were young, they'd already had plenty of experience, appearing at local venues, supporting visiting acts, and making friends on the local music scene. Their air of maturity and professionalism was beyond their years. They were confident without being brash or pushy. They were polite and well-mannered. And Matthew and Tina had spent many long hours teaching them how to conduct themselves in the company of strangers. All this would add to their popularity among those they met. Each member of Destiny's Child had to turn their back on whatever a normal life might have been for a 15-year-old girl. When their friends were off to the shopping mall, a movie or a house party, the girls invariably focused instead on their work. And their dedication paid off. By 1996, Matthew had secured them an approach from Elektra Records. Though this undoubtedly gave them a boost to their confidence, it must have slipped a little when the company dropped them a few weeks later. Ever the professional, Matthew sent the girls back to working on their routines and followed up the next line of inquiry. Within a few weeks, another offer came their way. Appearances by the girls with such mainstream acts as Boys to Men and Sisters with Voices had created a local buzz about the group. Picking up on this, Columbia set the wheels in motion to sign the girls to their impressive roster of pop and rock groups. A piece written in the Houston Chronicle had described Destiny's Child as a quartet of angels, and had gone on to say, "Don't be surprised if you see these Houston teens set the rhythm and blues industry on its ear in the next few months." It was an uncannily accurate prediction of what was to come. Having signed up for a record deal with one of the largest and oldest established recording companies in America, the girls set about gathering material for their first album. This involved a comprehensive trawl through the back pages of urban black music, drawing on the rich heritage that those who'd gone before them had created. The origins of rhythm and blues go back to the end of the Second World War, shortly followed by musicians who worked through the craze for what was known as jump blues, with its heavy emphasis on dancing and a raucous, exhilarating energy. This in turn led to the birth of the earliest rock and roll records, and inspired Elvis Presley, Little Richard, Bill Haley, and a large number of other singers and players. In the 1960s, record companies like Tamla Motown took the basic template for R&B as it was known then and sweetened it with catchy pop melodies to create a vibrant and highly influential black music scene. This allowed artists like Stevie Wonder, Diana Ross, Marvin Gaye, and Michael Jackson to find an outlet for their extraordinary talents, and to transcend the limits that an essentially conservative and often racist musical establishment would have liked to impose. By the 1970s, R&B had travelled a long way from its humble roots. Over the next 20 years, increasing sophistication robbed it of much of its original exultant energy. This was the background that Destiny's Child were working from. It was up to them to take a scene that had become stale and bland and inject it with some new, vital power.
I took songs from the 70s that inspired me, from Shuggie Otis, who is a classic 70s artist, to duets with hip-hop artists Jay-Z, Sean Paul, Lil' Kim, to legendary people like Luther Vandross.
Among the artists used for initial inspiration for their first album, released in 1998 and called simply Destiny's Child, were the Isley Brothers, a one-time Tamla Motown act, Barry White, the king of bedroom soul and the heavyweight icon of the 70s soul scene, Al Green. By combining this rich source of material with the talents of top producers and singers such as Dwayne Wiggins, Jermaine Dupri and Wyclef Jean from the Fugees, the group could take the best of both worlds, the past and the present, while stamping their own individual approach on the marriage. For their first single, the girls wrote an instant classic, No No No, with Wyclef Jean helping out on vocals. To give an added boost to their profile, Columbia placed another track, Killing Time, on the soundtrack for the summer blockbuster movie Men in Black, starring Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones. The film was a smash hit and introduced millions of moviegoers to the sounds of four 16-year-old girls from a quiet suburb of Houston. To say all this was a good start is something of an understatement. The only sad note at the time concerned the death of Andretta Tillman, the girls' original mentor. Andretta died of cancer before the album was released. A dedication to their friend appeared on each of the group's first 3 albums. By the time their first album was released, the group had a platinum-selling single on their hands, with a dance remix rocking the clubs all over Europe. Their album would go on to sell 500,000 copies by June 1999. By achieving so much in so short a space of time, the girls had a lot to prove. In the 1990s, pop had split into so many factions that artists like Lauryn Hill or Janet Jackson could have huge hit albums one minute and then disappear from the charts as if they'd never been there at all. Following their initial success, the girls threw themselves back into their hectic work schedule. They embarked on a world tour, kicking off on April the 29th in Nashville, Tennessee. They also managed to find time to release a second single, Get on the Bus, featuring hip-hop star Timbaland. The song was featured in the movie Why Do Fools Fall in Love, gaining them yet more invaluable exposure. By the end of the year, they had won several prestigious awards, including 12th place in Billboard's Best Song of the Year poll. The girls had shown that hard work, dedication, and enough humility to learn from those around them could pay handsome dividends. Just how much of this success was down to the presence of Beyoncé in the group became clear when the group began writing songs for the second album. However, even at this stage, she was beginning to emerge as a natural leader. Destiny's Child's best songs had a tough, uncompromising stance that was conspicuously lacking in mainstream R&B at that time. It was unusual for groups like Destiny's Child to appeal to those who regarded themselves as having mature tastes. Yet writers for British newspapers such as The Guardian and the rock-orientated weekly music paper The New Musical Express, both of which could come across as being either elitist or snobbish, were praising the group highly. And in the months and years to come, the name Beyoncé Knowles would be given the greatest prominence within the group. With their second album, The Writings on the Wall, Destiny's Child began to show a more determined approach to the way in which the album was produced, with all the girls sharing writing credits and Beyoncé getting 6 production credits. This time, there were fewer high-profile collaborations, with Missy Elliott the best-known guest to appear. With its lyrical content firmly on the side of girls who take no nonsense from those around them, particularly the men in their lives, The Writings on the Wall's best songs celebrated women who reject the idea of being second best in their relationships. With songs like Bills, Bills, Bills and Confessions taking a swipe at men who sponge from their girlfriends or treat them well at the beginning but then take advantage as time goes on, Destiny's Child resisted the idea that love is a fairy tale. These were songs for real people who, in the words of the great Aretha Franklin, just wanted respect. Not much to ask, but still so hard to get.
I want us each to grow individually, become stronger, and write some great songs together and do something unpredictable and different and basically show the world that girls can get along.
The Writings on the Wall was released on July the 27th, 1999 and shot up the Billboard chart to number 6. It stayed in the top 10 for 9 months. And just as it seemed that the world was theirs to command, it all began to go horribly wrong. with the events that followed thrusting the Knowles family into the harsh realities of the more cutthroat side of the music business. Bitterness and acrimony that surrounded a catastrophic split within the group, and at the centre of it all, whether she liked it or not, whether she deserved it or not, would be Beyoncé. LaToya has said that she was lying in bed one day when the DJ came on the radio with the news that there'd been a split in Destiny's Child, and that two of the girls were going out of the group. Latavia said that she too was listening to the radio when she heard that Destiny's Child had filmed a video for the single Say My Name from the group's second album. This surprised her, mainly because she hadn't been there. Putting two and two together, she realised that somebody else had taken her place. What followed were events that would see the group split cleanly down the middle, with LaToya and Latavia thrown out, and two new members, Farrah Franklin and Michelle Williams, drafted in as replacements. All this seemed to show the Knowles family, particularly Matthew, and by implication Beyoncé, in an unfavourable light. Rather than get LaToya and Latavia together and warn them that if they didn't shape up, they were out of the group, it seemed the family had gone behind their backs to find replacements for them, without bothering to tell them, and leaving them to find out for themselves the hard way. To hear over the radio something so devastating, after almost 10 years in the group, must have been traumatic and humiliating. To make matters worse, Matthew referred to them in the press as the backing singers LaToya and Latavia. This was despite the fact that all four girls were receiving writing credits on the group's songs, indicating that they were something more than a living backdrop for the talents of Kelly and Beyoncé. Matthew went on to imply that LaToya and Latavia had become lazy and disinterested, failing to pull their weight in what should have been an equal partnership. For their part, the two girls felt that with Beyoncé, Matthew and Tina, such a close-knit family group, and Kelly as almost an adopted daughter, the cards were stacked in favour of the Knowles family. What they had wanted was their own manager. This would have allowed them a degree of independence within the setup, able to negotiate their own part in the setup without feeling like outsiders, unable to influence what were effectively family decisions. What emerged through the Knowles' announcements to the press was that LaToya and Latavia had sacked Matthew as their manager. This did not go down well. Matthew, Tina and Beyoncé may have felt that this was an act of ingratitude. It was certainly true that the success of Destiny's Child and the accompanying glittering lifestyles for LaToya and Latavia was in no small part down to the steadfast dedication and vision of Beyoncé's parents. However, it is questionable as to whether this meant that they could assume total control without consulting LaToya and Latavia, or even acknowledging that the two girls may have had their own point of view. Even very close-knit families have to negotiate differences among their members. But despite all this, the fact was that the girls were out, and to this day their careers have sunk almost without trace. It was an unfortunate end to 9 years spent living a fairy tale dream. It led to speculation that Beyoncé was as much of a control freak as her dad was alleged to be. She now had no one to argue with her, as Kelly seemed to be content to go along with whatever plans the Knowles family and Mafia put forward, for the time being at least. And so, with two new members on board, it was business as usual for the band. However, after just 5 months at Camp Destiny, Farrah Franklin decided she'd had enough. She cited exhaustion as her reason for leaving. It seemed that Matthew's boot camp regime of fitness workouts, jogging and 6 hours a day rehearsal had been too much for her. She, like LaToya and Latavia before her, dropped from view in the months after her departure. It seemed there was room at the top only for Destiny's Child, no matter who, apart from Beyoncé and Kelly, they might be. And if you couldn't take the pace, you might as well get off the bus.
Girls can love each other and girls can go do solo records that are successful and still come back and love their group members and have fun doing music because they all love music.
After Bills, 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 the group released 3 more singles from the writings on the wall. These were Bugaboo, Say My Name and Jumpin' Jumpin'. They kept the album on the Billboard chart for 47 out of the 52 weeks of the year. And with their excellent videos on heavy rotation on MTV and VH1, Columbia could rest assured that the girls were still, in every sense of the word, a hot property. In fact, their troubles seemed to energise them, giving a cutting edge to their new songs. Their next single, Independent Women, made their stance very clear. This neatly summarised their feelings about the place of women in the world and in relationships. They need no longer depend on men to provide them with the material things in life. Sisters were doing it for themselves. It did, however, lead to accusations that they were materially obsessed, singing endlessly about their pride in the clothes, their cars, and their jewellery. It may also have made men of a more traditional mindset wonder where they were supposed to fit into this world of all-powerful, perfect women. They were not so much tantalisingly beautiful as objects of intimidation, who seemed to regard all men who didn't shape up to their faintly fascistic worldview as scum who deserved to be flushed away with the bathwater. Maybe it was their payback for years of arrogance and double-dealing, treating women as status symbols to go with their cars, clothes, and expensive spending habits. And so, it was back down to a 3-piece, with Michelle on board as a fully qualified new member and potential survivor, depending on how she would shape up in the months to come. Destiny's Child prepared for their 3rd album. With a new single licensed to the soundtrack of yet another summer blockbuster movie, Charlie's Angels, their name stayed in the headlines and on the charts. It also gave an impression of the way their music was going, with Beyoncé seeming to lead the way in terms of musical and lyrical vision. R&B had received a severe shake-up, but the best was yet to come. The group spent the last half of 2000 writing and rehearsing their new material, interspersed with appearances at awards ceremonies. In October, Kelly broke a toe when she tripped on a backstage ramp during a costume change. Beyoncé's 14-year-old sister Solange took her place on stage, while Kelly sang from the wings. Musical history was in the making, as yet another Knowles family member made her first appearance on stage. At the end of the year, it was announced that Beyoncé and Kelly had resolved their differences with LaToya and Latavia out of court for an undisclosed sum. In other words, they'd been paid to go away and keep quiet. That seemed to be the end of it, but further issues would be raised in the future when the new album, called Survivor, was released. For Beyoncé, the hurt felt by her slighted former colleagues was not going to dissolve that easily. By this time, the group had recorded many of the tracks for the next album, which would contain 18 songs when released. When it hit the shops on May 1st, 2001, it was clear that what the group had been saying was correct. Rather than weaken their position as America's #1 R&B group, their recent troubles had strengthened them immeasurably. Whether through sassiness or bitterness, or a mixture of both, Beyoncé had masterminded an album of astonishing inventiveness and energy, with the girls performing their finest recordings to date. And there was no doubt now how Beyoncé felt about her former bandmates. They hadn't been able to maintain the pace needed to go out and rule the world, so tough luck then. The album contained 3 key songs of empowerment and affirmation. Independent Women spoke clearly for itself, as did Survivor, which seemed to speak about both Beyoncé's personal triumphs over adversity and perhaps carried a message for women in general. Bootylicious reminded women that they did not have to conform to the notions of beauty propagated by the media. They did not have to look like half-starved 14-year-olds. Historically, black women in America since the time of slavery had had a rough time. As slaves, they had no rights at all. They were not even allowed to call their children their own, as they could be sold on by their masters and often disappeared from their mothers' lives forever. Even in the early 20th century, life could be rough, as a black woman could be discriminated against twice, as a second-class citizen in society at large and between the sexes. In the 21st century, this was no longer going to happen. Not if Beyoncé had anything to do with it. The sound of the third Destiny's Child album was the sound of the summer in 2001. Not only had they survived, they seemed stronger than ever.
Working as a solo artist is very different. I've always been included in the decision-making process and always the creative process, but now I'm very much in control of everything.
Girl bands as a whole had historically been unlucky when it came to lasting more than a few years. The group that Beyoncé had taken on as her role models, the Supremes, were okay as long as they had Diana Ross. But when she left to have her ego surgically enlarged through her solo career, the group faltered. They still had hits without Diana, but it wasn't the same. In the 1990s, the British group who had given a name to the affirmation of female empowerment, the Spice Girls, found it hard to cope once their initial fans had moved on to other things. Popular music fashions are notoriously fickle. Move with the times or be left behind. Even their sassier counterparts, All Saints, fell apart after a couple of glorious years at the top. One analogy compares life in show business to being on board a ship. But on this journey, if you fall overboard, no one comes back to get you. You catch up or you sink. To keep moving on was the name of the game. To develop your career invariably meant that changes had to be made. Life in the 21st century seemed to be about constant and rapid change, in a culture of short attention spans and little loyalty to stars who were too slow to adapt to new expectations. In 2001, both Beyoncé and Kelly took on solo projects. Kelly released her first solo single, Angel, and Beyoncé accepted a role in the MTV version of Carmen, an opera written by Georges Bizet in 1875. In the 1950s, it had been turned into a musical stage show with lyrics by Oscar Hammerstein, and then into a film. Both times, it had been reinvented as a story about black people. Now it would get its third interpretation, retelling the tale for a new generation and a new audience, and providing Beyoncé with her first major appearance as a solo artist. Yet, as long as there is anything as certain as the fact that night follows day, there will always be the media vultures looking out for an easy meal, as the backlash syndrome kicks into gear to topple yesterday's stars from their places among the gods. Before you can say, yesterday's news, out come the knives. And very often, the stars play right into the hands of their willing assassins, by making the mistake of believing the hype that surrounds them, and their downfall is often of their own making. The Knowles family had shown themselves to be supreme control freaks, refusing to listen to past group members who didn't agree with every move they wanted to make. If anything were to go wrong, they would only have themselves to blame. In December 2001, Destiny's Child released a Christmas album called 8 Days of Christmas, a saccharine and faintly embarrassing collection of songs that revealed Beyoncé's continuing obsession with the rampant materialism to be stuck still in overdrive. On the second day of Christmas, she sang, "My true love gave to me the keys to a CLK Mercedes." The world that had been waiting with bated breath for them to make their first mistake was well served. Fortunately, not many people beyond their die-hard fans seemed to take much notice. Christmas was always a silly time, with people like Cliff Richard crawling out of the woodwork to embarrass us all. It was a time when people all over the world seemed to lose the plot and do things that were either uncharacteristic or extremely ill-advised. The Destiny's Child Christmas album was no exception. With Beyoncé soon to take time away from the group for her new movie role, and with the group announcing they were taking a break to pursue solo projects, did this mean that Destiny's Child were running out of ideas? They'd come so far in so short a space of time that it would hardly be surprising if they were beginning to exhaust their possibilities of what can be done within a three-piece group. Late in 2001, it was made public that Beyoncé's second major movie appearance would be as Foxy Cleopatra in the third Austin Powers movie Goldmember. The title was a suitably puerile reference to the third James Bond movie, Goldfinger. The name of Beyoncé's character was a reference to the 1970s blaxploitation movies made by black American actors Pam Grier and Tamara Dobson, who starred in Foxy Brown and Cleopatra Jones. Pam Grier paid tribute to her own role as Foxy Brown in the 1997 Quentin Tarantino movie Jackie Brown. In January 2002, Beyoncé attended sessions to record a song, Hey Goldmember, to be featured in the film and written by Mike Myers, who plays Austin Powers. The song featured samples of the classic 70s disco hit Shake, Shake, Shake Your Booty by Casey and the Sunshine Band. Beyoncé's sister Solange guested on backing vocals and made a cameo appearance in the movie, as did Britney Spears, who also made her own contribution to the soundtrack. With nothing new in the pipeline for the new year, the girls turned to the time-honoured ploy of releasing old material in a new format to keep the ball rolling, in case the world forget they existed. The Destiny's Child remix album, This Is the Remix, won praise from the fans and respect from the press, who had to admit that it was a cut above most such affairs. At the same time, it was announced that the girls would take time out for their solo projects and then set to work on their fourth studio album. Yet, as time went on, it seemed increasingly unlikely that it would be finished soon, if ever.
Kelly came down to Miami. She visited me for about a week while I was recording my album. So I had her there for a while. And the very beginning stages I played for Michelle and Kelly, but they heard the majority of the record, and I always want to get their opinions because I completely respect them.
When the Knowles family settled their original differences with LaToya and Latavia, they might reasonably have assumed that that was the end of their dealings with them. But a clause inserted in their severance agreement had stipulated that there should be no public slagging off between any of the girls. After all, at the time that they were thrown out of the group, the two girls had everything to lose. They lacked Beyoncé's formidable talents as songwriter, actress, and all-round woman of destiny. Cruel though it might sound, what they had left, no one seemed to want. It had emerged that Matthew Knowles had wanted to add them to his guardianship role, as with Kelly. That would have made them legally, and possibly morally, bound to the Knowles household, and would have made it even more difficult for them to have any say in their lives. To add to this, they accused Matthew of refusing to disclose to them details of the financial earnings of the group. Then, in July 2002, a new grievance was aired. They had claimed that Beyoncé had gone against the terms of their agreement by criticising them publicly with a disrespectful phrase in the words to Survivor. "You thought that I'd be stressed without you, but I'm chillin'," she had sung. "You thought I wouldn't sell without you, sold 9 million. So, once again, Beyoncé found herself at the heart of a very public legal storm. Were these girls just never going to go away? In a television interview relating to the unfortunate incident, Beyoncé said she thought the legal claim against her was a bunch of bull. This was unfortunate in itself, as by saying that she had made yet another unflattering comment about them, and the whole thing threatened to escalate further. And yet more troubling demons came crawling out of the closet, as it emerged that the estate of Andretta Tillman, who'd been given such gracious name checks on the group's album sleeves, had also filed a lawsuit against Matthew Knowles for inappropriate financial dealings. Perhaps it was time for anyone who had ever had anything to do with Destiny's Child, or those who represented their interests after their death, to have a go at grabbing a share of the formidable amount of cash that had built up during the band's career. Or maybe all was not as it should have been at Destiny Central, with the accounts being creatively revised in favour of the Knowles family mafia. If the allegations were true, and Matthew had tried to withhold money from the woman who the group liked to sentimentally remember as their much-loved and dearly missed friend, then it all seemed like shoddy behaviour indeed. Meanwhile, Beyoncé had plenty more to think about. Solo projects within Destiny's Child were originally planned by Matthew to be released at appropriately staggered intervals, so that none of them would be competing with each other in the charts. Michelle had previously released her own album of gospel songs, and now it was to be Beyoncé's turn. Her song, Work It Out, produced by the Neptunes, was already available on the Goldmember soundtrack and was doing respectable business in its own right. But Kelly's collaboration with Nelly, entitled Dilemma, featured on the album Nellyville, was being given heavy airplay by enthusiastic radio DJs. Her debut album had not been planned for release until early 2003, but with the success of Dilemma, it made sense to bring the release date forward, and Matthew had scheduled it for release in October. By an unfortunate coincidence, that had also been the original release date for Beyoncé's first album, which was now pushed back to December. It seems you can't have everything, and it must have appeared as if Kelly stood a better chance of winning the battle with her virtual sister. This meant that Beyoncé, always assumed to be the natural winner in the Destiny camp, had to deal with her debut album released third in line to her colleagues in the group. Watching the living soap opera surrounding Beyoncé's life was becoming almost as much fun as her records.
I wanted to get new, fresh people. And I feel like when people get in the studio and they're both hungry and they're both respectful of each other and they love music and there's no egos involved, something really incredible happens every single time. So I wanted to find the new sound.
When Goldmember opened in America, it became an instant smash hit, with the statistics surrounding its first weekend's business confirming it as the 5th highest grossing comedy of all time. This was good news all around, and in particular for Beyoncé, who had a lot riding on her performance as a relatively unproven actress, having only her appearance in Carmen behind her. According to Mike Myers and the film's director Jay Roach, she was a natural and a true professional. It would not be long before she was offered her third movie role, The Fighting Temptations, for which she would also act as producer. Of course, there was now even more speculation about that fourth Destiny's Child album, as comparisons were being made with NSYNC, and specifically Justin Timberlake's hasty exit, on finding greater success beyond the fold as within it. It's a commonly accepted fact that artists have large egos, so why share the glory with others when you can have it all to yourself? And for Justin, whose image as fresh-faced boy next door in NSYNC had been less than flattering, selling out to become a fully fledged grown-up urban music star must have seemed like an irresistible option. With Kelly now appearing in the slasher horror movie Freddy vs. Jason, it seemed that the girls had, wittingly or otherwise, decided to prioritise. It was becoming increasingly common for singers to boost their careers with a movie or two. So why bother with all the hassles of being in a group unless you enjoy sharing the limelight with other people, when you can make music on your own, or get in other artists to duet with, or as remixers? However, in November 2002, Beyoncé was still insisting that Destiny's Child would continue to exist once the group's various solo efforts had been completed. The problem might be, though, that once the band members were ready, the world may have moved on. Hip-hop and R&B were rapidly evolving in musical terms, and 2 or 3 years was a long time to stay on hold. Then again, Beyoncé undoubtedly had the intelligence and the business acumen to judge how Destiny's Child should adapt to new trends and ideas. The latest news, as 2002 drew to a close, was that the group would definitely record again once Michelle had completed her second album of gospel songs, due for release in spring 2003. By that time, Kelly's album, Simply Deep, was in the shops. It featured a duet with Solange, but there was no sign of Beyoncé. Perhaps it was time for the youngest Knowles family member to join the group. Meanwhile, Beyoncé was working on sessions for her solo album with Luther Vandross and Missy Elliott, taking advantage of the opportunity to work with great artists from the past and the present. In the new year, she began working on her next movie role as nightclub singer in The Fighting Temptations. This would be a very different role from Foxy Cleopatra, as she would now have to prove herself as a straight actress, without the extravagant costumes and knockabout irony of the Austin Powers series. If she could pull it off, more scripts would be bound to follow. Another link with black music's formidable heritage came when Beyoncé worked with Damon Elliott, whose mother, Dionne Warwick, had been one of the foremost black pop singers of the 1960s, with a string of hits written by Burt Bacharach and Hal David. Damon had helped record a version of the 1958 Peggy Lee classic Fever, which was to be included on the soundtrack of The Fighting Temptations. The song had also been covered by Madonna in 1992. To round off 2002 in grand style, Destiny's Child appeared in December at the KISS 108 Jingle Ball held in Lowell, Massachusetts. They were lowered onto the stage by a hydraulic crane and grooved effortlessly through their dynamic set in the company of 8 dancers. This was a show that delighted the fans and blew any fears that they were either on the verge of disbanding or had burned themselves out. It was a fitting end to a year that had seen little action from them, but there was still no sign of that fourth elusive album.
I really wanted to make a statement artistically. I wanted to show my growth vocally and as a writer, from a young lady to a woman. And I think I accomplished that. And it's really amazing how different the songs are, but it still sounds like one album.
Finally, in March 2003, Farrah Franklin emerged to prove that for one former member of Destiny's Child at least, there was to be life after her hectic but brief career aboard the Destiny mothership. Farrah announced a solo album later in the year. Meanwhile, Beyoncé, Kelly and Michelle continued with their solo projects and seemed to be able to have their cake and eat it. Their show in the closing weeks of 2002 had proved that they still had their eye on the ball as far as the group was concerned, and they could each enjoy time in the spotlight in their own right. It was announced that Beyoncé's album had been scheduled for release in June. Beyoncé was busy recording in Miami, and Matthew promised even more interesting collaborations. One of these was to be with reggae star Sean Paul, who'd recorded his contribution for the song Baby Boy. Further visits to the studio to work with the world's foremost R&B diva had been scheduled by the Neptunes P. Diddy and Jay-Z. It also emerged that Beyoncé was planning to record with Aretha Franklin for the great singer's forthcoming studio album. Aretha's classic track, Respect, had set the template for the social concerns echoed in many of Destiny's Child's better songs. Once again, it seemed that there was no end to the possibilities open to Beyoncé to record with her heroes and musical mentors. Aretha is certainly amongst soul music's most vital female icons, and this would provide Beyoncé with a chance to record with one of black music's truly great performers. In March, Destiny's Child came together again to record a song called I Know for the soundtrack of The Fighting Temptations. The track had originally been slotted for inclusion on Beyoncé's album, but she felt it was better suited to the group. Consequently, it became the first new Destiny's Child recording to be released in almost 2 years. In interviews, the girls were upbeat about the future. They all agreed that the opportunity to pursue solo endeavours had allowed them to grow and mature. They confirmed once again there were no plans to split. There were hints that the new Destiny's Child album had been scheduled for release in July 2004. Meanwhile, Michelle announced that she'd landed a part in a Broadway play, Aida. And then, just to confuse the issue even more, Matthew was quoted as confirming what many people had suspected all along. In the run-up to the release of Beyoncé's album, he announced that when Destiny's Child finally reconvened the following year, Beyoncé's sister Solange would be added to the group, making them a four-piece once again. With so many rumours flying about, it was hard to know what to believe. But to take Solange on board had seemed like the logical move ever since she'd stood on stage for Kelly when the singer had broken her toe. It also made sense to keep any new developments within the family fold, thereby avoiding a repeat of the unfortunate debacle with Farrah Franklin. Finally, Beyoncé's album was ready and was delivered as promised in June 2003. It sold over 180,000 copies in its first week of release and was rewarded with favourable reviews. Yet, by July, it had been knocked from its #1 spot in America by a new offering from Ashanti, whose solo work away from Murder Inc. had established her as one of the hottest properties on the R&B scene. And then, in August 2003, just when you thought you'd finally got some idea of what was happening at Camp Destiny, Beyoncé squashed Matthew's announcement that Solange would join the group. According to her, it was just a rumour, and an ill-founded one at that. With her LP, Solo Star, and a movie role in the offing, Solange was doing fine on her own. So that was that. It was confirmed that when Destiny's Child finally re-emerged, they would remain as the three girls the world had grown to know and love. The same, but different, as the intervening years between Survivor and whatever would come next had seen so much activity from the three members that it would be strange if they hadn't changed. Quite what those changes would be was open to speculation. Only time would tell.
I like to surround myself with good people because I believe that everyone is a product of their environment, and I try to keep that environment nice. And I work hard, and I just try to really think about things and make logical decisions and still be a real person, because ultimately I want people to say not only am I talented, but I was a good person.
In American pop in the 21st century, the roles of the performers seem to be infinitely variable. Singers can become actors, actors can release albums, and models, if they get it right, can do both. Beyoncé, Kelly and Solange have all released solo albums, and all three are making their names known in movies. And lucrative modelling or sponsorship programmes may yet lie around the corner. For her own solo projects, Michelle Williams has reinvented herself as a gospel singer, forming the direct link between Destiny's Child and the devout religious beliefs which they all hold. So, what might the future hold for Beyoncé? In 2003, she was just 22 years old. In that brief lifespan, she'd been a member of Destiny's Child for 9 years. They'd worked for 5 years towards the release of their first album, and since that time, they had released 5 albums in 4 years, as well as contributing tracks for innumerable movies and establishing themselves as one of the most formidable live acts on the planet. They had seemed to come from nowhere to take over the world of pop. And at the centre of this storm of activity was Beyoncé. She had shown what so many in show business know all too well, that away from the glitter and glamour of their profession lies a world of single-minded dedication and endless hours devoted to perfecting your craft. With so much achieved, in so short a space of time, it would seem natural if she slowed down a little and took stock of the options open to her. She seems to be in a uniquely privileged position. Her profile in the music industry is such that she can call on the best performers and producers for any project she chooses to undertake. With a successful solo album under her belt, she may choose to tour her solo material, at the same time keeping a keen eye on further opportunities open to her in Hollywood. As producer for her third film, she has a vested interest in making sure the movie is a success. If she can prove herself as a straight actress, she may have a distinguished second career ahead of her, without having exhausted the possibilities of her first love, that as leader of Destiny's Child. When Diana Ross left the Supremes, she turned her back on one of the most renowned black pop groups of their time. Her solo career seemed to take her away from the preoccupations of young urban black women and into the glitzy and often depressing world of middle-of-the-road entertainment, with its supper clubs and star spectaculars. Unlike many of her contemporaries, she seemed to lack any true depth. Beyoncé has already proved herself to be beyond that point. Her best songs have always provoked strong reactions, showing herself to be more than just another pretty pop singer with a shelf life limited to a few brief weeks at the top. Whether or not Destiny's Child ever release another album, Beyoncé seems assured of a productive future. And if she stopped working tomorrow, her contribution to the world of pop would have been great, glorious, and fun. Beyoncé Knowles, the uncrowned queen of R&B. Long may she reign.
Thank you for buying Maximum Beyoncé. We hope you enjoyed it. Watch out for further titles on Chrome Dreams coming up soon. If you did enjoy it or have any comments or suggestions, please write to us at Chrome Dreams, PO Box 230, New Malden, Surrey, UK, KT3 6YY, or email us on mail@chromedreams.co.uk. Details of our full catalogue are listed on our website at www.chromedreams.co.uk. Thanks again for listening, and goodbye for now.